Well, good morning and welcome to the Temple of Wisdom. We are logic and reason. For anybody new to the show, we are the show that brings together scientists, educators, engineers, physicists of all types to critically examine conspiracy theorists and their claims. And today we have a very special impromptu, more or less impromptu show where we will be talking about a very special milestone in the life of a conspiracy debunking channel. That's right, ladies and gentlemen, we have attracted our very first conspiracy theorist troll commando trying to attack the Temple of Wisdom with false dichotomies, straw man, and other logical fallacies. But before we get into that, let's go around the room and let's see who's here. Jeff?
Hey, good morning, everybody, or good evening, or good night, wherever you happen to be. It's Jeff here. Glad you could all come for the show. We're going to have some real fun today. Kick around a bit of a troll and teach him the real truth. And I'm very, very pleased to invite back onto the show returning guest and an excellent debunker, AT2 Productions. Jared, why don't you say hello?
Good morning, everyone, and what a wonderful Sunday. I gotta admit, I love watching the shows. I love being a part of the episodes I have been, and I'm looking forward to another rousing discussion of actually correcting the idiocy that's out there appropriately and cogently.
Yes, absolutely. So am I. And returning with us once again, Mike the Engineer, otherwise known as Mr. Mike Bertelson. Mike, say hello to everybody.
Well, hello, everybody. Yeah, I'm looking forward to having another good discussion on the reality of the world. Nice logic and real science. That's the way that to show how it all really does work.
Absolutely. And keeping everything running smoothly in the live chat is our chief mod, Amy Hogan. Amy, good morning. Amy. Hit the mute button, Amy. I know it's early in America, Amy, but hit that mute button. We desperately need to hear from you.
As you do, it's not sure what's going on there. Good morning, everyone. I hope you're all ready for a great show. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whatever time it is for you, and thank you for coming.
And for all of the mods in the live chat, just so you know, if we attract any conspiracy theorists to this stream and they want to spout off in the live chat, go ahead and let them. As long as they are not being complete jerks with racist, homophobic, or otherwise inappropriate comments, we will go ahead and let them talk however they want to talk. Because let's face it, if we're going to talk about them and their ideas, we should let them spout their ideas. We may even address their comments, questions, and concerns on this stream if their questions, comments, and concerns are actually on topic. So, for instance, if we are discussing rocket science, and they want to discuss flat Earth, sorry, go ahead and spout your flat Earth nonsense. But we're talking rocket science at that point, just for an example. And keeping all of our whistles and bells in the stream operating smoothly so that we stay on the air for the entire time we plan to is our own Taddy Bogle. Taddy, good morning.
Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night, wherever the hell you are around this beautiful globe of ours. I hope you are all doing well. Kick back, relax, and enjoy this absolute dillion of an episode, man. We've got some breezers for you.
All right, so with that, let's dive right in. We in our comments section of our episode 4, we were discussing the conspiracy claim that rockets do not work in a vacuum. A gentleman by the name of Chuck P. again and again decided to try to talk to us and tell us the way things really work. What was the first comment that he put up? Let's start there and move down the line.
Okay, well, let's have a look. The first one was interesting how only people in the chat are mods. And, well, As my friend Logical would say, that's not our fault. Others haven't shown up to the live show. If you want to input something for a live chat, then you should be here for it. But his first really interesting comment that came along was how many diapers and rolls of toilet paper were on the Apollo missions? Now, I'd like to just before I pass this on to you guys, I just want to redress the reply that I left, because I think I may have misspoken, and I'd like to clear that up. My original comment said that none required. Command module was equipped with outboard waste dumps for the fluid waste, and the CM and LEM carried waste collection bags. What I meant to really say there was specifically to the claim of diapers, that again, they weren't really needed unless they happened to be in the spacesuit outside of the ship. And that was the only time they really required the diapers. So, Mike, what do you think?
Yeah, that is, there we go. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, they did have, they called it a fecal collection system that they sometimes termed as diapers when they're in the modules themselves, but they technically weren't. So yeah, realistically, there's very few ways you can do what you need to do in such a confined space, and there's actually quite a bit of technology involved in the equipment that they did use. It's a little better these days. There are actually real toilets on the ISS. Well, not toilets that you would recognize in maybe your own bathroom, but yeah, back in the days of Apollo, they had to find ways to collect and store that waste within the modules themselves. So they had specialized equipment to do that. And no, it was not running around in Pampers all day.
And at the same time, this question leads me to think that this gentleman thinks that you have to have, 20, 50 rolls of toilet paper to be able to wipe your bum while you do your business in space. I'm sorry, but we on Earth tend to overuse our products for personal hygiene. But when you're going into space, weight is everything. The amount of mass that a space capsule can carry, that a rocket can get up into orbit and out into space, has to be carefully controlled. So therefore, when they have personal hygiene products, yes, they absolutely have to be frugal with them. What about you, Jared? I know you're kind of really into the whole space thing.
Oh, so exactly. Thinking about the fuel cost of getting even just a kilogram of anything into orbit alone, let alone a lunar transit, is phenomenal when you actually break it down. So there is a reason why the majority of the astronauts selected for not just the Apollo program, but also Gemini before it, were all current or former military, because especially in that day and age, what did we have to deal with being in the military, especially on active duty? Making the most of the least amount of materials you can get your hands on. This includes even personal hygiene products. You're not going to have an entire rucksack full of toilet paper with you out in the field. You got to make do with as little as possible. So having people already bred for that type of conservation is probably a good thing when you're going towards that sort of modality for dealing with the human waste side of it. And even then, if someone wants to bring up and question how it was done, I really have to wonder how much actual research they've done, because in a matter of about 0.3 seconds, I was actually able to pull up the entire history of the Apollo waste management system and have quite the results right here in front of me, where it breaks down how it was hooked up with line diagrams, actual photos of the equipment itself, and the hookups. Amazing detail for it. For anyone who is actually curious, I am about to post that into the live chat for everyone.
In the background, Mike Bertelson had just posted a link to an article with the Business Insider talking about there was no toilet on the Apollo moon missions. Here's how. And then it goes on to talk about collection bags. So if Amy could post that link in the live chat as well, that'll give some people some reading material, as maybe they do their thing. So anyway, I didn't have a chance to actually look it up this week. I got really busy. Did anybody look up and find out exactly, so we can answer this directly, exactly how many rolls of toilet paper or other personal hygiene products were on the Apollo moon missions?
Well, I couldn't really find any information on that in particular, but I did find out from that same Business Insider's article that the waste collection bags for fecal matter were actually included a compartment for toilet paper. So my guess is that they were individual sheets or small packet of sheets that were actually part of the bag and were used for that one purpose and went into the bag after they were done, kind of thing. But I don't think they really had toilet paper rolls with them.
Yeah, I'm thinking as much as they have to make sure they got every ounce of mass accounted for in their fuel calculations, that they actually probably counted out how many squares of a particular, 1-ply, 2-ply, or whatever that they actually sent up with the astronauts.
Yeah, and the fecal collection system too. It had a pocket for tissue wipes. It also had a little small pocket for germicide. The whole idea is to have a small self-contained single-use unit, and that's what they did. It had everything you need to go do what you need to do one time, and then they just stored them. Actually, I think they left the ones that were on the lunar module. They left in a bag outside of the descent stage. It stayed down on the moon.
Yeah, and Amy's kind of poking me in the background. She's got a couple of interesting comments that I think she wants to read out for us. Amy, what you got?
Yes, please. I've got a question from Microbloganism. When you say equipment, is it the astronauts' equipment? And then Digital Demonic Davros says, logic and reason. Interesting how we have P-Gate that you guys are talking about toilets. Dorian B. Gaming says they did not have toilets on the Apollo missions. They just used cups.
Cups is not exactly correct. That's actually not correct at all.
Yeah, when you look at the opening for the fecal bag itself, which actually that paper that I posted does have granted it is grayscale, it is more black and white photo of it. It does flare out and give the appearance of being cup shaped, but it was a pliable bag in all directions with just enough of a firm rim so they didn't make a mess on themselves. And when it came to the liquid waste, when they were in the command module or in the module on the LEM itself, not in their EVA suit, but their regular suit, there was an apparatus that was pretty much a constantly available liquid collection system with a connector that they would then hook into the CSM receptacle to drain what they have on their person into the total waste collection system of the module itself. So again, they put a lot of thought into how to deal with just the necessary waste evacuation of a human in that sort of environment.
Yeah, and I think it should also be noted that when they use their overboard waste dumps, that kind of does speak a little bit to Newton's third law and how rockets work in space, that there was enough of a little bit of a thrust that over the course of 236,000 miles, if they used that overboard waste dump enough, they actually had to make a little correction burn, didn't they?
That's right. As a matter of fact, on the return of Apollo 13, they actually avoided using the overboard dump system for exactly that reason. Isn't that right, Jared?
Well, yeah, the actual evacuation of the collection system was scheduled that way they would actually be able to do all the prep work. It's like, okay, we're about to evacuate it. There was this much volume in there. So once you evacuate, we're going to have to do a correction of this thrust for this duration and from these RCS motors to keep us on track, because even a slight deviation would end up being a gross error on the other end if uncorrected. And the whole thing about, take it down to a simple example of firing a firearm here on Earth. If your aim is slightly off, the farther the shot is, the more away from your intended target you're going to be. Now, extrapolate that out to 250,000 miles just from Earth to the moon. You could see how even a 1/10 of a degree off in their trajectory, they wouldn't have been able to come back. They would have been lost forever.
Yeah.
Yeah, because at that point, as they were heading toward the moon, Newton was in the driver's seat. They weren't actually under full burn the entire time. They were coasting. So had they not been being attracted to the gravitational field of the moon, they wouldn't have been able to stop and turn around and come back without running out of fuel. Yep, absolutely.
Yeah, it's analogous for anybody who's ever fished in from a small boat. Even just casting that line, you could feel the boat start to drift just because of the casting. It's the same kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and so we've kind of beaten the pee out of that particular comment. So what was the next thing that this gentleman tried to enlighten us about?
Okay, well, the next thing that I noticed that was originally actually addressed to you, Logical, but I'd like to present it to Jared and Mike. What do rockets push against in space? I forget. I'm thinking they must be pushing against photons. Maybe they are pushing against the deadly radiation particles in space. What do you say?
The combustion chamber of the motor.
And that's it. It's sometimes it's kind of hard for people to visualize, that because a rocket is really a closed system all unto itself, and what's going on outside of it, other than basic drag and gravity, just doesn't really have anything to do with the amount of thrust that those rocket motors are applying. It doesn't push against an atmosphere. It doesn't push against anything else. The very fact that mass is leaving the system, the conservation of momentum, you got mass going that way, well, you got to have mass going the other way. It's as simple as that. It's kind of hard to visualize, I suppose, but it is easily mathematically determined and testable. There are several videos I've seen on YouTube where they have launched a rocket, or as there was one with a soda can and a vacuum chamber, and sure enough, when stuff left the can or left the rocket, the rocket motor or the can moved, even though it was in a vacuum.
And it's interesting with the conspiracy theorist, when we reference those types of experiments in a vacuum chamber, they actually come back with, well, as soon as the rocket fired or as soon as the hole was poked in the soda can, then it was no longer a vacuum and it was pushing against its own exhaust.
Yeah, and there's a problem with that too, because one of the videos, it's really a pretty good one, when the can burst because the pressure in the chamber got low enough that the pressure inside ruptured the aluminum can. He frame by framed it. The minute that opening came, the can was moving. There was not, we're talking like, what was it, 1/20th of a second. There was not enough time, and you could see the pressure gauge, the vacuum gauge, I'm sorry, on the chamber did not move as that can is moving. So that's a straw man argument. It's not. It's just a red herring. It isn't. I even had done this once in college too, with a rocket motor and a model truck for a bet that I won, but some people thought I didn't win. But we'll decide. That's another story altogether.
Yeah, I also see it as a little bit of intellectual laziness because we do have to have, and I hate to use the word imagination, but we do have to have enough imagination to visualize in our minds what's going on. Now, with the advent of high-speed cameras, that could actually show us better than what we can visualize in our mind's eye. But unless we can visualize that, we're never going to really achieve true understanding, in my opinion.
This is one of those situations too where conspiracy theorists like this could run these demonstrations and experiments themselves, and they don't seem to want to for whatever reason. You can draw your own conclusions as to why that is, but these are repeatable experiments, and if you're gonna poo-poo them and say they didn't happen and they don't work the way they're claimed to be working, then you either need to do it yourself or shut up.
Yeah,
And
a lot of people are commenting that way.
And since we have
He
two
just-
engineers,
well,
since we have two engineers in the panel, I thought I'd ask, how difficult is it to build a home vacuum chamber to run these experiments?
It's not really that difficult at all.
Yeah, the biggest issue is choosing your materials, because if you go with it depends on how much visibility you want, because dealing with most commercially available plexiglass in a usable thickness, you do have to get creative and make sure that your seals at the edges are spot on, or else they are going to fail pretty close to immediately. But depending on what you're setting up and how, there are ways around that to mitigate it, such as going with a metal container and actually going with welded seams. You have less of a potential for failure of the vacuum chamber in that bit. But then the question comes as well, what are you going to use to for your actual opening and closing? How are you going to be able to get the viewing in there as well? There are the minutia to setting it up that you do have to get creative with, but it is in no means impossible. A little tricky, maybe difficult depending on your skill level, yes, but difficult does not mean impossible.
No, and there's equipment. There's actually, I've seen a few websites, I haven't looked recently, but on DIY vacuum chambers, and basically you can get circular tubular plexiglass in thicknesses that'll work, and those are probably the easiest ones to use, because being a cylinder, it's can hold that differential pressure a lot better than sometimes the more square chambers. And then the one that I saw with the soda can, that was a home built plexiglass box, so it's visible from all sides. And if you're careful about how you build it, you could probably build one of those things for under $50. The pump itself, the vacuum pump, that's a little bit more expensive.
And
it's not that hard.
With the type of vacuum pumps we can buy commercially, how close to a full vacuum can we really achieve with a home setup?
Well, that's really going to depend on the size of your chamber. Most of the little commercial, the consumer available pumps, that you could probably get for a couple, less than $200 or so, they'll get you down to near as close to zero in a small chamber as you can get. Probably have maybe tenths of an inch of water absolute pressure in there by the time you get it sucked down. It's in all intents and purposes as close to a vacuum as you're going to get terrestrially.
Yeah, and obviously the larger the chamber you build, the better the vacuum pump you're going to need.
Yeah.
Because it's all, just like traveling in space, it's all about, mass and a piece of equipment's ability to handle that mass. And with that, I think Amy's been trying to poke me a little bit in the background. Amy, apparently you have some comments for us?
I sure do. Dorian B. Gaming had said about the cups that was in reference to Sleeping Warrior.
Ah,
And then Granny Jen had a good question too. It was funny. She goes, if an astronaut had explosive diarrhea, would it propel them off the lunar surface? And the Flatties and Digital Demonic Davros says, the Flatties and 24/7 think we are descended from chimps and have no evidence apart from Peltdown Man. And then John Rapp had my pet idea on Flurf logic: Moon and Earth's atmosphere, so rockets do have something to push on. Ergo, moon landing absolutely could have happened.
And I was a little confused in the background. You said something about a $200 super chat. It's like, wait a minute, our channel isn't monetized. What's going on with that, Amy?
It's not. That's a cute little comment too. Thank you for reminding me for that one. He said, he did say, you guys are the best. I have 3 observations that anyone can use to debunk FE, and I think he's going to post them.
Oh,
That's
I see. And what was the next comment that this gentleman had posted?
Well, yeah, basically that whole part of the thread was just his complete misunderstanding of Newton's third law. But then further down, he went directly to Mike and started trying to build a bit of a straw man. I thought maybe Mike would like to share that with us. He says, so I have to be a rocket engineer to have an opinion? Typical. My experience with engineers is that they think they know more than they actually do. When someone actually doing the work tells them what really needs to be done to achieve what the engineer wants, the engineer shrinks back into their shells, and they're the ones who end up shutting up. Tell me how Nixon spoke to Neil and Buzz without any delay, yet there's an 11-second delay between the IAS and Houston. What do you say to that, Mike? Would you like to enlighten us?
Yeah. Well, I questioned him on what he was saying, and for a basis for his comments. So yeah, it was definitely a straw man by saying, so I have to be a rocket engineer to have an opinion. Well, no. In order to have an opinion, you got to base it on something. You don't just get up in the morning and say, hey, I'm going to believe the sky's green because I want to. No, you draw a conclusion based on usually some data provided, something you've read, something you've learned. Sometimes conspiracy theorists will make the data fit the conclusion, which is the opposite way to do things. And then he throws in about Nixon and Buzz and 11 seconds, and my comeback to that was that also is a straw man to try to get away from the question I was asking. What is your opinion about rockets based on? And he also, this is another classic here, the 11 seconds thing. It's not 11 seconds. As a matter of fact, it can be as short as a quarter of a second, depending upon where the ISS is in relation to whatever relay satellite, because it's moving very fast and it's in low Earth orbit. So you can't directly aim a communication radio wave at it. So we bounce off of communication satellites for that. And that 11-second thing was some special. It was actually I think it was the 4K demonstration where NASA introduced. They have now a 4K camera up there, and they were talking from an auditorium full of press through. I think through Houston to the ISS, and there was a whole lot of delay going on in that. But you don't get that same delay in other videos where the astronaut is on the ISS talking to one of the some morning TV show or on the NASA channel or on anything. There's usually Yeah, second delay or so, and you really don't even notice that much of a delay in a discussion because people hesitate as it is. And as far as Nixon goes, I mean, yeah, they were talking probably 2.5 seconds or so for a delay, and that's not a whole lot either. And most people probably wouldn't have noticed any kind of delay like that in the discussion. So,
Yeah,
and
and those, like you say, those delays are really contingent on how many relays they have to go through to get the signal to the endpoint they want it to get to. Sometimes
correct.
it's one or two or three, so it just depends.
Right, right. It
Wait,
was more direct to the moon for the Apollo quote phone call unquote. And phone call is kind of a misnomer. I mean, it's not like you had he just picked up the phone and he dialed the number and said, "Hey, how you doing?" Now there was a whole lot of technology and a whole lot of state of the art for the time equipment used to make that happen.
Right, and then basically in a nutshell, what Nixon had done was call NASA ground control, mission control in Houston, and they relayed that phone call via radio to the Apollo mission, and the Apollo mission then relayed radio back to Houston, who then relayed it via the telephone lines to the White House.
Correct. Yeah, and the other straw man is he was attacking my being an engineer. Obviously, he went to my channel to see who I was, and I told him that nice try to straw man, but I'm not taking that bait. I was a mechanic for 20 years in both the New Jersey Army National Guard and the United States Navy before I even went to college for my engineering degree. So, I turned wrenches for a lot of years before I do what I do now. So,
You had
yeah.
a solid practical experience before you even started the advanced studies.
Yes.
Yeah, and
Jared,
that's the big difference.
Yeah. Jared, do you get anything to offer on this particular point?
Oh, again, the whole delay thing, it's almost as if signal processing lag is an issue on both ends of a transmission, no matter the type or size. But yeah, that 11-second, I wonder how many of these people realize just how much data is required for a 4K signal. I don't. So for those who don't know, one of my hobbies here on YouTube has been a motovlog based channel from me riding around on my motorcycle. I record all that footage in 1080p at 60 frames per second, 50 megabytes per second of footage. I have over 1.5 terabytes of raw footage from my time on the bike. That's not, and the amount of time that is actually recorded is probably 30 hours worth of footage, and we're in the terabytes at 1080, not even 4K. So yeah, to compress and translate all that information even over that distance, it does take signal processing time, and it happens. But like Michael had alluded to, other avenues of communication, real-time communication, when you're not using that strong of a data stream, that signal processing lag not completely goes away, but pretty close to it. It is
Yes.
it is anywhere from 1/10 to 0.3 seconds from low Earth orbit. Now, when you're going to the moon, yeah, you are going to have a couple second delay. But again, for those of us who are deployed in the military, especially aboard ships, if you ever use the shipboard sat phone, you're getting that kind of signal lag anyways. Nothing.
We didn't have sat phones on a submarine.
Yeah, and that amount of data that you have just from riding your bike around, that's a pittance compared to all of the data that comes to NASA from the moon missions or any other spacebound mission.
And that's part of the reason why I would agree with Mike's later response about He watches a video and when he's pressed for facts to back up his opinions, he starts throwing straw men around just to avoid it.
Yeah, he
Yeah,
came back again and pushing that 11 second. Oh, the interviewer said 11 seconds. You know, I think he's I don't know, maybe he's used to people backing down when he pushes his straw man, but I was having none of that because you know, I came back to him that you're just doing it. You are cherry picking from a single video when there is, as Jared said, so many other videos on YouTube and other sources that show he's completely wrong in his assertion and how he's representing it. And it was a complete misrepresentation of what's going on.
right. And even his cherry picking showed a complete misunderstanding of the technology involved and what was really going on, which kind of leads us back to his opening statement of this particular comment with what I got to be an engineer to have an opinion. And for the audience listening in the live chat, and for any conspiracy theorists that may be watching this in replay, I wanted to point out that no, you don't have to be an engineer or a physicist or anything else in order to have opinion. But like Mike said, you have to have opinions based on some data, some evidence. The only reason we have decided on the particular format for this show and calling in highly educated, respected experts within their field is to avoid that, you know, you're doing the fallacious argument from authority. Well, no, we are the authority because we are those highly educated experts. We welcome discussion from anybody, regardless of your educational level, provided you can show some evidence for your assertion. And just saying, I think, isn't enough.
And that led to an interesting comment that he directed at you, Logical. He says, I'm outclassed. I'm not a creepy monster like you idiots. I'm not you. And to which you replied, what was it now?
Yeah, I was basically trying to point out to him that on your
almost every ignorant conspiracy theory he rolled into
yeah, there was
one.
a whole lot more.
I was trying to point out to him before he made that statement that you are aware that you're arguing with real scientists here, are you not? You know, and then he came back with that, and that kind of gave me a bit of a chuckle.
Yeah, it made me chuckle too.
Yeah, I wasn't trying to be prideful about that. I was just trying to make him aware that you're not talking to a normal set of, you know, people who debunk flat earth and other conspiracy theories from looking something up on the internet, learning, and then doing a debunk video. You're actually talking to people who went through years of study and training and practice in their fields to achieve the level of knowledge that they achieved. Not to shut him up, but to make him aware that you need to up your game if you're going to really argue with us.
Yeah, and that one, his final comeback was full of all kinds of the top conspiracy theories too.
Yeah,
he went all out on that one.
Yeah. So,
yeah, and that
you even
that's just a. Oh, I'm sorry, I got a little lag.
Amazing that you'll blindly believe without evidence. Wow.
Yeah, and that's just a shotgun fallacy where he realized he was losing an argument, so decided to throw out a bunch of other arguments. But that usually only works during a live debate when your opponent don't have a lot of time to think about what you're saying. In a comment section, it's like, that doesn't work.
Yeah, there was a whole lot of straw man going on there.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. And that takes us to just about the end of this thread. Are there any other comments that I may have missed, Logical?
No, I think you pretty much got them all. Before we jump into the conspiracy theorists that you attracted on your particular channel, I wanted to check in with Amy and see what's going on in the live chat. Amy, anything we need to know about?
Nothing so far. We're looks like everybody's pretty much caught up on the conversation and everything like that. So
yeah. Suffice it to say, rockets do work in space. Get over it.
Yeah. Now, on your channel,
Exactly.
Jeff, you had a video a while back talking about the conspiracy theorist who thought that satellites are just
Satellites.
balloons. You called it
Absolutely.
the Saddleloons. I love that title. So you got a conspiracy theorist within the last couple of days trying to inform us about how rockets really work. And this guy actually I found much more interesting because he had just enough real information mixed with unreal information that it made me stop. It made me think before responding. It wasn't just at first, your very typical conspiracy theorist throwing out silly fallacies.
Yeah.
Do we have any of those comments available to check out?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, this thread is like 100 comments long. His name is Bopta. And for all of you who are not familiar with him, he's actually a llama farmer somewhere in the UK. And he starts off this whole thread with NASA is the largest purchaser of helium on planet Earth. Satellites are balloon powered, and the Earth is an oblate spheroid. Now, before you guys comment, I'd like to give you my response to him, and then I'll let you guys jump in and tell me where I've been correct or incorrect. I told him, oh, you poor fool. If you only knew. Number one, NASA is the largest purchaser of helium on Earth. So what? 10 seconds of research will tell you that NASA uses the helium mostly as a cryogenic agent for cooling various materials and as an inert purge gas for the hydrogen systems on the shuttle and a pressurizing agent. I mean, what's wrong with that? That doesn't mean satellites are balloon powered. And as far as that comment is concerned, I basically returned with, well, that's the stupidest thing I ever heard. I'm sorry to say. The highest recorded balloon flight was approximately 49 miles. Actually, that's incorrect. It should be 49 kilometers. And any half-wit would understand that something like GPS would never work. It's not high enough. You're a few hundred or even 1,000 miles short of altitude. And the third comment, the Earth is an oblate spheroid. Well, that's just simple physics. You know, you turn a sphere around its center axis, it's going to bulge out in the center, and the bulge at our equator is so slight that the Earth can pretty safely be referred to as a spherical body. So, what do you guys think?
Yeah, his first comment is really a huge ball of assumption. And plus, I don't even know what you would call this logical for non sequitur. They purchase all the helium in the Earth, so therefore satellites are helium powered. It just doesn't. One does not have anything to do with the other, and it's just an ignorant comment all by itself.
Yeah, he's just making an assumption based on what he thinks they're using that helium for without actually asking any questions.
Right, nor can he provide any citation or evidence for such a stupid claim.
And because of my nature, I'm actually looking into the consumption and purchase of helium worldwide. As of the most recent report from a couple years ago, the U.S. barely over 50% of the worldwide consumption of helium. Like fractions,
not just NASA.
Correct. And even then, when it comes to the individual uses within the United States itself, things that would not be usages not limited to NASA include leak detection, pressure and purging, welding, breathing mixtures, controlled atmospheres, and while NASA does do the majority of cryogenics work with helium, they are not the only source. So when you really look at it, how much welding does NASA do with helium? Is it all of the 20% of helium that's used in the US? Probably not. And same thing with leak detection. There are agencies other than NASA doing leak detection at probably even more volume than NASA is doing. So the 5% that's used for leak detection, most of it is not NASA. So I would love to find the source of why this person is spouting what he is.
Yeah,
Well,
exactly.
and that leads me to my next question for you, Jared. That took you all of about a minute and a half while we were discussing this to look it up. Where did you find that? What is your source?
This one is from, hang on, the National Academies Press, predominantly for sciences, engineering, and medicine avenue of research papers.
And that, boys and girls of the conspiracy theorist crowd, is how you do research. You ask a question, you look it up, whether at your library or online. You look at where the information is coming from. Is it a credible source? You read it. You try to understand it, and you bounce that against your question and other people's assertions about that question before you come to a conclusion.
Exactly. His next comment, I can't really speak too intelligently about because I'm not ex-Navy, and I openly admit that, but I'd like to get your opinions on this. He says, I'm completely mistaken. NASA uses helium for its balloons. There are many up there that are balloon powered, and that is how you can receive GPS thousands of miles from land. I am a yachtsman, and GPS works in the middle of the Atlantic. GPS is completely different from Decca or Lawrence Sea.
Well, here first, I think I need to make a minor correction, and no offense, Jeff, but you're unaware. But our other two guests, including myself, are Navy veterans. There is no such thing as ex-Navy. We are former Navy. You can always take the sailor out of the ocean, but you cannot take the ocean out of the sailor. Am I correct, gentlemen?
My apologies, gentlemen. My sincere apologies, gentlemen. But also, he continues to say that I know the Earth is an oblate spheroid because that is how yachtsmen used to navigate with a sextant, and the British Navy used to map the world. On a big ship, the height of the eye is approximately 100 feet, and the horizon is 12 miles away. This gives you a triangle with the sun. Okay, and he says,
See, now this is what I was
because I live in the city.
This is what I was talking about before we started this comment thread. He's got just enough real information that makes you think, but yet he mixes in some of the silliness. So someone who isn't aware, doesn't have the education or the real life experience, might not catch some of these fallacies. So at this point, I want to turn this over to Jared and Mike so they can address some of this.
Yes, please.
Yeah, I always found that particular comment kind of interesting because one, it seems to be, and I've got nothing else to base it on. But he seems to be not a flat Earth conspiracy theorist. He believes it's a globe, and he throws out GPS and all this other stuff, but I just don't understand why he would assume that, okay, we live on a globe, then why do all satellites have to be balloons? It doesn't really make any sense to me. And this whole comment is really red herring. I don't even know. It just really doesn't make much sense. But GPS, yeah, you could probably get that to work on moving objects, except that it'd be way too hard to because the satellites themselves have to know their exact positions at all times, and times they also measure time between you and it. So yeah, randomly floating balloons probably wouldn't work the way he thinks it would. Actually, I don't think it would.
No, the reporting station, which in this case he's asserting is the balloon, but in actuality is a satellite in orbit.
Mm-hmm.
It needs to know where it is. It is its own fixed reference point. And if you have three varying reference points, which is you need a minimum of 3 points for accurate triangulation.
Right.
Of course, the more data points you have, the more accurate the location is going to be, yada yada yada. But if those 3 points that are reporting, oh, I see you here, if that's constantly moving, you're not going to have an accurate position of where you are. You're not going to have a reliable system that you can use.
Yeah, and correct me if I'm wrong, gentlemen, but most of the GPS satellites are in geosync orbit at 36,000 miles. If you had a free floating balloon, it would take a very complicated tracking program from the ground to actually follow that. It would actually be more difficult to use balloons for GPS than satellites.
Yes.
Yeah. The GPS satellites, their orbits, they're known quantities, so that's how the satellite can keep track of its position, and they're not in geosynchronous or in geostationary, or they actually have a crisscrossing orbits. It's actually kind of impressive how they got them all going in specific orbits, and that known orbit, that known position, that it verifies relative to certain stations on ground and to the other satellites to make sure it's where it thinks it is vitally important to make all of this work. If it's just a random balloon that's subject to whatever upper atmosphere winds are going on, it's just not going to work. And that also doesn't work for those satellites that would be, because he's throwing GPS out there, because those are in motion, so he may be able to play some games there. But this certainly wouldn't work for those geostationary communication satellites and direct broadcast TV and radio satellites. That they have to be in a fixed, non-moving position relative to some point over the equator in order for this to work.
And that's exactly why we have the format we have. And thank you for the correction, Mike. I want to point out, that just because you're very educated, just because you have one or more college degrees, doesn't mean you're an expert in everything. I've self-educated about physics, space programs, cosmology, but I'm not an expert in those things. My expertise goes to, psychology and clinical counseling. I've expanded my horizons, but I don't know it all. So that's why we bring on all of these different varieties of people, so that if we do get something incorrect, we can self-correct immediately. So thank you very much for that.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think the whole point of that comment of his too is he sort of seems to keep away from this thread of other kinds of satellites and other kinds of satellites that are up there, so that you can keep away from geostationary orbits. I think that's sort of his, I don't know if you'd call it a straw man or what it is, but that was I thought that was a very interesting comment by him, and he certainly is trying to control the narrative his way with that.
Oh, absolutely. And your question about why he thinks this and not understanding where his thought processes are coming from are going to be made readily apparent here very shortly. It has a lot to do with how he thinks rockets actually work. Before we get to that, then, Jared, anything to add to this point so far?
Well, I'm curious if he's going off of the whole thing about there being a couple private entities using essentially modified weather balloons to provide internet access and other communication means to areas where a more hardwired infrastructure is not available or not feasible, because no one denies that is a thing. No one denies that hasn't been done. It's just not being done in the purpose or scale that a lot of people like Bo here seems to think they are.
Yeah, I see that argument a lot from conspiracy theorists when they point to that particular thing. And like you say, those are in areas where it's sometimes just not feasible to get a tower built, or maybe it's too mountainy and rugged for satellite communications to really fill in all the little valleys and everything. But it is a very limited scope.
Yeah. And it all boils down to, well, the same for many conspiracy theorists. They just don't do the required research. Or if they do, they don't like what they find, so they blow it off. And Logical, you made a comment trying to kind of tell this bullpat that YouTube videos are not acceptable research. Peer-reviewed research is from respected databases would be acceptable. That's what we go by. But not
Absolutely.
YouTube videos.
Yeah, absolutely. And for someone of, say, a high school or some college, maybe not graduated college, YouTube might be a good place to start, but you have to critically evaluate who is telling you the information on the YouTube video, and take then what they're saying and search out other sources. When you solely restrict yourself to YouTube, a lot of that information is kind of questionable. And if you're narrowing your scope, you're not going to get all the information that you really need to make a good critical thought process decision.
Yeah. And he makes his position clear. He says, I don't understand your point. I'm not interested in peer-reviewed research. I'm interested in the facts. Peer review is just code for circle jerking. If they are government funded, it's circle jerking on steroids. So you can see where this guy's coming from.
Yeah, exactly. That's just intellectual laziness that wants to believe that all the scientists and all the educators and all the governments and all of the world space programs are in cahoots to hide whatever. Jared, Mike?
Does he not understand the intellectual and borderline physical hard-on that some people get by going out of their way to show that a competitor in their field is wrong? It's actually where a lot of their funding comes from private entities. Is like, oh no, this is the work I'm doing, this is right. Yeah, these other guys, they might be right here and here and here, but they're missing this major bit. This is where they're wrong, and I can show you how. That's the mentality you're dealing with.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, no kidding. Scientists are really, really hard on each other. Case in point, I went to a psychology counseling symposium and introduced one of the papers I had authored, and I had other professionals at or above my own educational level who took joy in trying to rip it apart. They were cruel and harsh, and I really had to know my stuff to be able to step up and defend my position. It was not an easy task.
No. This guy is just completely unwilling to accept that he doesn't know what he's talking about. He so much as says so. I was not dumb enough to get massively in debt and spend years and years paying it off in some stupid job. I know my physics much better than you. What I have said is true and cannot refute it.
Yeah, and I also think it is also an intellectually dishonest comment, because what he's saying here is, I'm not interested in your facts. Only what I decide is actually a fact, and I don't care where the source comes from. That's just, in my opinion, that's just a dishonest comment to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and I love how he throws out the whole, I'm not interested in hearing from someone who went to college and went in debt and had to then work it off and all that. Hi, my name's Jared. I have a couple degrees, and I have no college debt. Never did from day one. Would you like to talk to me?
Probably not. I think it'd run the other way.
Yeah, I was in the same boat. I went to college at 40 years old after my children were grown. I tapped into the GI Bill that I earned while I was in the Navy. Was also given some funds for disabled veterans through the VA, and the rest that I needed to make up, I went and applied for all kinds of grants and scholarships, to the point that not only did I get a free education, but I had a little bit of take-home money to help support myself through my college years at the same time. Because let's face it, when you're carrying a 6 to 7 semester class load, working full time is a near impossibility. So not everybody who goes to college gets massively in debt. You just have to approach it a little more intelligently, and really work at it. And for that reason, when I was in college, I treated it like my job. I looked at it like these people who were giving me these grants and scholarships were paying me to go to school to learn. And since I had that type of a work ethic that the Navy instilled in me, I came out with honors in every program that I had eventually became degreed in.
Yeah, and his comment about college level educated, what I don't think he realizes, or maybe he does realize and doesn't care, is that those people that are college educated are the people that are designing your car and your toaster and the bus you drive your kids to school in. I mean, all this stuff relies on all of that college education and all that physics that we engineers learn when we design these things that people use in their everyday lives. So it's either you trust the engineers and designers and scientists are designing what you use in your everyday life and they're doing it correctly, or you dismiss it all and go to a horse and buggy and go off the grid and grow your own food and you don't use electrical power in an outhouse and all this other stuff. I mean, you can't have it both ways.
Yeah, that was something that we talked about in one of our previous streams here too. That whole appeal to authority thing that the conspiracy theory used is in itself a fallacy to even make that statement, because at some point in our lives we have to defer to somebody else's authority. Every time I walk into my doctor's office or my dentist's office or go to the mechanic for a breakdown on my car, I am deferring to their authority because I don't have those expertise.
Yeah, a doctor and a mechanic is a really, really good example of that, because if you have to trust the doctor, you have to trust the mechanic, because 99% of people aren't going to be able to answer those questions and to be able to figure out what to do to fix their medical or car problem or whatever it happens to be.
And it seems to me like this guy is really suffering from a bad case of Dunning-Kruger. I mean, his confidence in his own superiority is beyond belief. For example, he had a response to a question from Anti-Flatter. You cannot attain escape velocity with a rocket in the exosphere. The air is too thin. The law of diminishing returns applies. That is why a rocket cannot work in space. You cannot build up enough momentum in a satellite to stop it from descending to Earth within a very short time because of gravity. The momentum will be stripped away by friction, even in the air, a thin air of low Earth orbit. I do not expect you to understand any of this. You lot are suffering from Stockholm Syndrome, and it takes a while for that to wear off.
Okay. Before we get into that point, I'm sorry, but I've gotten so wrapped up in this conversation, I have completely neglected Amy. And I wanted to let her have a moment to jump in with some comments before we get going on the next phase of this.
Sure, thank you. Microbloganism says, I would have thought CERN would have been the biggest buyer of helium. And the real non sequitur said, we use nitrogen for leak detection on industrial refrigeration. And Microbloganism says, fun fact, helium will mess up the clock speed on newer iPhones and make them crash, which I never knew. 1 Minute Debunk says, the satellite doesn't need to know where it is. Only the receiver needs to know where the satellites are. Also, trilateration, not triangulation. Forever Learning says the balloons would need GPS satellites to know where they are. And 1 Minute Debunk says GPS satellite constellation orbits twice a day. So, and the conspiracy had a question. Speaking of psychology, do you think that the belief in a god has correlation with the conspiracy theorists believing in these theories?
That's a
No,
big
I don't
question.
think a belief in God has anything to do with the conspiracy theories. I think the conspiracy theories is more to do with a distrust of authority and a misunderstanding of science and a misrepresentation of your own abilities and what you can and can't do. A lot of people do not like to admit that they do not know.
Yeah, I also, as far as the psychological aspect, it's interesting that all of his comments up to this point and further on are claims. There's no evidence of claim. And then when he's pressed for that, he actually says, I don't need to quote anybody, I am the authority. So
Yeah, I picked that up.
it's like, holy cow. So this is, so he's built this entire, I don't even know how to term it from a psychological standpoint. He's built this entire world where he is the authority, all other authority lies, therefore he's correct.
Yeah, that's exactly what he's done. But I also think to a certain degree that he pulled that comment right out of our channel description, trying to counter what we're saying and completely misunderstanding what we're saying when we say we are the authority.
Yeah, that could be.
Yeah. Yeah, I've got that response right here. I do not need to quote anybody. I am the authority.
Yeah.
I am not the retard paid by the government to lie to pay his mortgage.
Yeah, and when we say we're the authority, what we're saying is we are educated and respected in our own fields of expertise. We are not saying that we don't need to show where our information comes from and cite sources and cite experiments and cite whatever we need to fill in. We're just saying, but yeah, with him, he's basically saying, I know it all. Sorry, no, nobody does.
Yeah, and that is a good point. Nobody does. I mean, when I have to deal with the customer, which in my case is the United States Navy, they don't just take our word for, hey, this is how it's going to work. We still have to show, we still have to prove, we still have to provide all the calculations, all the evidence. And I got to tell you, I have a phone list next to my telephone of people in certain areas that when I run across, I give them a call for the answer because I know that it's not in my wheelhouse. I know that I wouldn't have enough knowledge in those areas. So most every engineer I know that I work with, and I work with thousands of them. We have like 12,000 engineers at EB. We all work in a team effort because we all know that we don't know everything, and we're always looking for help on those things that are outside of our wheelhouse. That's the way scientific and engineering endeavor works. Nobody works in a vacuum. Nobody makes all those decisions. Nobody knows everything.
Right, and even just say in engineering, what you do with building Navy ships, one engineer may know a piece of the puzzle a little bit better than the other engineer. Not any one engineer is going to know all there is about every aspect of that shipbuilding.
Right. Yeah, my area is reactor plant and propulsion plant systems, and when I have to deal with it with stuff on, let's say, the vertical launch tubes or the periscope hydraulics, I go talk to someone else about that.
Jared, how about you?
Yeah, it's the same thing with what I do for my company. I'm not the end all be all. We have that in-house network that can break things down even further. So my expertise primarily is in the electrical side of the house and the computer side of the house. But guess what? For a threat detection system, there's a huge mechanical component to it. So when something comes up that we think might be coming from the mechanical side, from the physical side of it, we have a group that we actually have access to for that reason. I actually came across an issue where there was a bearing in a system that was starting to go out of spec, and it was causing a vibration which was actually messing up with some of the communications between the computers. We initially thought it was a communication path issue until we actually ended up putting a meter physically on the frame and tracked it for a few days, and we were getting more of a transmission through the frame of the system than you could detect or hear by hand. We needed an actual device to do that.
Yeah,
So,
and that's a good point too, because what Jared is saying is that there are plenty of times, actually a huge amount of times, that you don't rely simply on somebody's knowledge and calculations. You have to go test things. You have to go look at them and find out why they're doing what they're doing.
Yep, and just looking at them always isn't enough either, which is why we have specialized pieces of equipment to do the jobs that our eyes can't see and our ears can't hear and our fingers can't feel, because a lot of these components are very, very small.
Yeah, and this I don't even know how to pronounce his name. Bota.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I thought it was Ptah. I thought he was making a reference in his name to Klingon, but that's just me.
Yeah, he keeps throwing out the straw man about education so that he can keep dismissing it.
Yeah.
There's these comment after comment about that.
Yeah. It's infuriating.
Yeah, so it's he's definitely got built an interesting argument.
Yeah, and to go back to his comment thread, what was it that I had put on pause there, Jeff?
On which comment was that?
On Bo's comments before we called Amy in, and I said, hold that thought. What comment were we on? I forget.
Oh, yes. He was talking about why rockets cannot work in a vacuum, and that we are all under the Stockholm syndrome, and it takes a while for that to clear up.
Yeah, so he's starting to argue the education is indoctrination thing with that statement, I believe.
Yeah, exactly.
So, well, let's get back into that discussion, because people really loved that episode.
Yeah, no kidding. Let's see. Okay, he made one comment to you, Logical. Army or Navy, whatever. Everybody loves a sailor. State-backed education is indoctrination. I bet you even pay taxes and vote. Are you a good little citizen slave? You can keep your logic and reason. We certainly have reason and logic for a logic and reason.
And to answer his question directly, yes, I do pay my taxes. Yes, I do vote. Why? Because I understand that society needs to work together to be productive. This whole every man for himself thing is never going to work. That way it leads to anarchy, and then we're back into some of the dystopian science fiction stories that you see on TV. And also at the same time, I engage in the political process because that helps me be self-actualized. That helps me engage in society and keeps me from slipping down into the rabbit hole of fear and denial because, oh my God, they are out to get me. There's plenty of studies that show that people who engage actively are less likely to fall into some of these silly conspiracy theories.
Yeah, what I find interesting is his next comment about, to you, stop changing the subject, when that is his go-to in this whole thread, is to throw one straw man after the next, one red herring after the next, to control the narrative. It's interesting.
Yeah, I don't remember what I said to him to elicit that response. What did I say to him, Jeff, since you're looking at that thread?
Sorry, I lost my track here. You just told him you are quickly becoming a character of a thinking, rational adult.
Yeah, that wasn't changing the subject. telling him that you're quickly becoming a caricature. That was just an observation, because what he was saying made little to no sense.
And yet he was the one
Very right.
changing the subject from the rockets to, you know, use indoctrination and the government and taxes.
Yeah, exactly. Jared?
Yeah.
I just laughing to myself because he's accusing you of changing the subject when, like Mike just pointed out, he was the one who keeps going away from a single topic and jumping around. It's always, I always find it fascinating how people of that mindset will make the claim, "Oh, you're changing the subject." It's like, no, you asked this question, and I always have to stop myself from laughing when they get angry at you pointing out their own words against them.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And-
and that's funny.
Yeah, and throughout this whole thread, Anti-Flatter was asking him for citations, and he just refuses to give up any. And it gets to one point where he tells Anti-Flatter, "Are you kidding? You don't know that a rocket relies on high pressure area behind it, so it goes into a low pressure area directly in front of it? How did you think it worked? Unicorn farts? Rocket science was invented by the Chinese over 1,000 years ago. And guess what? Wait for it. At a given mass of rocket, the higher the pressure behind it, the faster it goes. I swear to God, trust me, I am Merlin the magician. Of course, satellites fall to the ground if they are not supported by a balloon. Gravity is a bitch. I can't provide any links because it is just basic science, and I wouldn't want to insult you." That's who we're
Yeah,
dealing with.
Yeah.
there's a problem there. If it was basic science, you would have no problem locating a citation. What he caught himself from saying is, it's just common sense. That's what he wanted to say, but that is the worst of the worst apologetics you can try to use in that sort of discussion.
Yeah. Yeah.
And this is another situation, and he's strong with this one, where the claim is the evidence of that claim. Therefore, we don't have to provide you anything else.
Yeah.
Yeah, and it's a complete misunderstanding of the Newton's laws of motion. It's a complete misunderstanding of what thrust is. It's not pushing against an atmosphere or anything over the ground or anything else. It's just the force of the gases escaping a very small nozzle that propels things forward. You know, the more of mass you force through a smaller space, the more thrust you're going to get.
Yeah, and
Yep.
I would strongly strongly agree with Anti-Flatter's response, where he says you can't provide links or any indication of how you came to know this. If that's the case, then you have failed to meet the conditions of burden of proof. Thus, until you can back your claim, it shall be disregarded as conjecture.
Yeah, and when I refuted him with Newton's third law and a basic example of how rockets are actually working and not pushing against an atmosphere of the ground, he just hand waved it away and then continued to ask me for more evidence. So I at one point actually responded to him that, okay, you're not accepting peer review because they are lying to you. You're not accepting, my definition of how rockets work. You're not accepting any evidence, but yet you keep asking me for more evidence, and all you do is hand wave it away. That to me is circular reasoning at its worst. So basically he was telling me, in my opinion, it seemed to me that what he was telling me really was, unless you agree with me, I'm just going to hand wave everything you say away.
Well, one of his own comments shows really what he's thinking. He says, "Can you show actual photos of real satellites in space, not pretend ones?" He's telling you that even if you do show him a photo, he's going to call it pretend, so it doesn't matter what photos you show him. But he doesn't realize, though, that satellite photography, there are people out there who have no idea about any sort of flat Earth, round Earth discussions or controversies, but their one of their hobbies is actually satellite photography. You have guys out there who spend a lot of time tracking these things with their telescopes and on computers to try to snap a picture. This is something he could do. You know, this is something other conspiracy theorists like this can do. Those satellites are up there. And if you put a little thought into it and have a little bit of equipment, then you can do that too. You could take those pictures yourself and not have to rely on someone else so that you can completely dismiss what it is they're going to show you.
Yeah, exactly. Jared, Jeff?
Yeah. I got nothing. That's, I just find it really funny that these conspiracy theorists, no matter what the topic is, they always seem to think that we are the ones that have the burden of proof. And I'm sorry, but it just doesn't work that way. What do you guys think?
Multiple times in this thread, he made the claim that he is making no claims, but yet he's making the claim of how he thinks rocket works. He's making the claim of denial of how we say rockets work. He's making the claim that, you know, at one point, we haven't got to it yet, he's making the claim that in order to have a satellite orbiting, it has to be under constant thrust to escape gravity, that angular velocity means nothing. So he's making multiple claims while denying he's making claims.
And then claims to be an authority.
Yeah, exactly. Go figure. I can't get my head around that. He says you do not need to use the word claim to make a claim. A claim is a position of intent. At this moment, you are actually claiming many things without realizing it. You are claiming you are a human, a legal entity, and because of the discussion on this thread, you are claiming the status quo position of rockets supposedly working in space and satellites orbiting the Earth without a helium balloon. Now, if you believe a rocket can work in space, then prove it. Excuse me? Prove that it doesn't.
Well, he's right there. I am making the claim that I'm following scientific consensus, but I'm basing that on particular reasons and data that I have actually looked into myself, even though I'm not an expert in science of rockets and satellites. I've made enough of my own inquiries to say, yeah, I can agree with scientific consensus, as does 99% of the rest of humanity. You know, so if you're going to say 99% of us is wrong, that's a claim. You need to show us that we're wrong and why with experimentation.
Well, and to make claims against all of current scientific knowledge as we understand it is itself an extraordinary claim and requires extraordinary evidence. But he's built this argument where he doesn't need to provide any evidence, and yet we do. That's kind of an interesting stance to take. All of science says this, therefore you have to prove that to me. It's like saying, well, the Bible was written by man, so therefore you must prove God exists. No, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah, it really is. It really is extraordinary to me, but there was something else that you can glean from that last little ranting of his. It was just a question before, but I believe it is confirmed now. This person is a sovereign citizen.
Yeah, I was going there.
Yeah, you're probably right, but I think they do that, and I see the flat earthers do the same thing with trying to put the burden of proof on us. That's actually for multiple reasons. One, if they can put us on the defensive, you know, they might get you into and make us defend our position. They might, if they're talking to a non-expert, get a gotcha moment that they can use for their cherry picking. It also absolves them from being able to produce any evidence on their own. You know, and like I said, they're just trying to put us on the defensive when we're going to turn that around and say, hey, you're making this new claim. Show, you know, I'm going to hold your feet to the fire. And until you show me something other than I said so, I'm sorry, I just got to kind of laugh at you at a certain point.
Yeah, it's common sense and basic science is not evidence of a claim. And that's all he's got.
And so, yeah, let's turn to Amy since it's been a little bit and see what's going on in the live chat. Amy?
Sure. I've got some good ones. Digital Demonic Davros quotes Hitchens and said, "That which is asserted without evidence can be dismissed without evidence." And he also quotes Carl Sagan, "Extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence." And then Granny Jen says, "We learned about rockets in space in 1963, third grade, and I was building and launching them by sixth grade. Who is this dope?" And then Digital Demonic Davros says, if you claim sovereignty, you can be arrested as an illegal if you don't produce government documents that debunk the sovereignty. And then even Kepler's law debunks this fool. And then Helmut Koch says, "I have a question. Do conspiracy theorists, can they be seen in line with people with gambling addiction, etc.? They get a rush by saying so."
Yeah, and that's something I actually said to him in this thread. I tried to get him to understand the type of circular reasoning argument that he is using. And I said, how about you show me you're actually a real person? But you can't use photographs because those can be faked. You can't be using government documents, i.e. your birth certificate, because, hey, the government lies to us. And you can't use any video evidence because, hey, it could be fake. And I'm not going to talk to you on the phone because, well, you could be a computer voice. So now, prove to me you're a real person.
Unbelievable.
You know, which is exactly the same argument he's using. You know, you can't use any empirical evidence to prove your point. Now prove your point.
Right.
Yeah.
Show me the proof so that I can dismiss it.
Yeah. It's like flat earthers expecting us to recreate a full-scale Earth somewhere in space to prove that water sticks to it. It's the same damn thing.
Exactly. And Jared, I'm missing your voice all of a sudden.
Oh, no, it's just nothing much for me to chime in at that point because it's all right on point, especially that comparison to the flat earthers of what their expectation is. And anytime we point out to them that what they are asking for is not reasonably doable because of the sheer size of everything, they seem to take that as a win. However, there are ways to demonstrate that whole water sticking to the outside of an object on a small scale. One of the sources they don't like because it took place aboard the ISS. Thank you, Chris Hadfield. But then the other one is something that they themselves do not want to do, despite how actually reasonable the prices have gotten over time. And that's take a ride in a vomit comet, take a ride in a parabolic flight, and take a bottle of water with you. And guess what? Yeah. There are videos of that being done too, but they deny it as some sort of CGI. And when you present it to them, it's like, no, you can go do this yourself. They never want to do that. They don't actually want to put their stances, they don't actually want to put their views up for scrutiny.
Right, exactly. It's like the weather balloon kits that I mean, even grade school kids, middle school kids are using. You know, there's videos all over the place of the class sending their little balloon up with a camera and taking pictures. I mean, if a class of 8th graders can do it, a bunch of grown-ass conspiracy theorists can do it, and nobody does. They just want you to prove your point, while they just don't have to show a single thread of anything.
Yeah, and at one point in this thread, I actually accuse him of dismissing any of our evidence simply because they, quote unquote, are lying to us, that everybody in the world is lying to us. And he actually came back and said, no, I'm not saying that everybody in the world's lying to me. That would be ridiculous. It's just the governments. But wait a minute. Let's think about this. You know, if rockets don't work the way we say it does, who's all in cahoots here? Not only do we have the government and government agencies and all of the space agencies around the world, but we have all the scientists, engineers, rocket scientists that work for those agencies. We have all the educators from kindergarten through postgraduate degrees. We have every physics teacher ever. The toy makers who make the the model rockets that we play with to test Newton's laws of motion are all in cahoots. That's a huge, huge chunk of the world's population.
And as when it comes to conspiracies in general, because we don't deny that conspiracies take place, they do. There are corporate secrets and plans and such that do take place, but here's the problem. The more people involved in a conspiracy like that, the more likely it is to be exposed and fail.
Exactly.
Yeah, even Watergate, one of the most famous conspiracies in government in the 20th century, only had a couple of dozen people involved, and it didn't take long for that to get to exposed. But just because a limited conspiracy like that does happen for power, control, and money, doesn't mean that these larger overarching things like flat earth, space is fake, satellites are fake, are also real conspiracies. One does not lend credence to the other.
You know, and this particular kind of conspiracy, this flat earth conspiracy, you know, goes back not just with NASA, it goes back centuries if they were to believe them. So in all that time, there's not been one deathbed confession, not one leaked document, not one overheard conversation or document that someone wasn't supposed to see. None of that has happened. You know, you got the Rosenbergs, you got the Bay of Pigs, the Pentagon Papers, Watergate, Abscam, Iran-Contra, Valerie Plame, Abu Ghraib, WikiLeaks. The bigger the secret and the more people involved, the harder it is to keep. And today, all of that could be leaked to the internet, and it would be years, if ever, to find out who it was that did it. So a conspiracy of this scope is almost literally impossible to keep.
Yeah, as a wise man once said, a secret held by more than one person is no secret.
Absolutely.
Don't everybody talk at once?
Yeah.
Well, I just wanted to go back again to the top, to the point of citation needed. He actually says to Annie Flatter that a citation is not proof. It is just believe me because I said it from someone else. In this case, it will almost certainly be a government source, and so is almost certainly lies and at best disinfo. You need to find the truth for yourself and then argue its merits from that position. A citation is just a real lazy thinking and is a result of Stockholm Syndrome.
Well, actually, I take umbrage with that because if you really know how to do research, a citation isn't just believe me because I said so. It actually creates a logic tree because when I look up that citation, it's going to lead me to other citations that are going to lead me to other citations. And every single one of those has some data involved, whether it's an experiment, statistical analysis, design and construction, and it's going to lead me through an entire gambit of study with a single citation if you do your research properly.
But isn't that what he's doing here? Isn't what he's doing just believe me because I say so?
Pretty much.
Yeah,
exactly.
pretty much.
Yeah, that's exactly what he's doing.
Yeah, and now he's throwing that on us, accusing us of what he's doing.
Yeah, that's classic psychological projection. And Jeff and I have been talking about probably sometime in January, one of those two episodes on this show, we'll be examining the psychological concepts with conspiracy theories. So stay tuned for that one. So we don't want to get too darn deep into that just yet. Amy, is there anything going on in the live chat that we need to be made aware of?
No, not too much right now. I haven't seen any comments really yet. But Professor Bell is here too, so I just wanted to give him a shout out and say hello.
Hey, Professor
hello.
Bell, we are so looking forward to your return next weekend. That's going to be a doozy of a show.
Absolutely. We were really looking forward to having you back, Professor.
And Mike, Jared, do you want to jump in on any of this?
Ready to keep moving along. Again, when the points are made eloquently enough, there's no reason for me to chime in.
Yes, but we love the sound of your voice so much. But anyway, what's the next point of contention, or does he have one here, or is it just kind of more hand waving?
It's pretty much more hand waving. Let's see what else, Slayer. He sent a link to Mike Bertelson showing a balloon-powered satellite. Did you check that out, Mike?
No, actually, I don't think I did.
Actually, I did, and that link, if I'm remembering correctly, was a NASA experiment at Antarctica where they launched a high-altitude balloon with an instrument packet that they can get into the circumpolar winds that go around the continent.
Yeah, that was I think that was a telescope too, wasn't it?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure what was all in that instrument packet.
Ray telescope of some sort that was balloon launched and would orbit Antarctica in the subpolar winds. Yeah, I remember that now. It's pretty impressive scientific package there. That was pretty cool. And what does that have to do with anything? Is now he providing that as a quote citation unquote from the government? By the way, this was a university project that was funded through the government. So is he using a government and university thing as a citation for his balloon theory? So
yes, he absolutely is.
Yeah, so he's going against his own. I won't believe any of your citations because it comes from the government.
Yeah, that's also circular reasoning, and none of us has ever said that NASA and other agencies around the world don't do experimentations through high-altitude balloon with different instrument packages. But that does not necessarily mean that all satellites are balloons. You know, that is A equals B, so B must equal C. And sorry, it doesn't work that way.
Yeah. I think a lot of his argument, what is it from a logical fallacy standpoint, is a reification fallacy. You know, it's taking some concept and claiming it to be fact without any sort of substantiation. So it's full of contradictions and logical fallacy.
Yeah, and just 2 comments down, he goes on again. Posted 2 links to helium balloons supported by satellites, or satellites supported by helium balloons. And he says, now show me real pictures. Again.
Yeah, I love that caveat, real pictures. Mm-hmm. You know, even a false color picture or a composite picture is still a real picture. So if I take a multiple shots of a mountain view and stitched them together in Photoshop to create a single panoramic picture, it accurately represents the panoramic view that I'm looking at. It doesn't now mean that that view is now fake.
Yeah. And he's demanding something that we all know he's going to deny anyway.
Yeah, and that's exactly it. That's the type of argumentation you get when you are dealing with someone who is acting as a dishonest agent in the discussion. Oh, I'm going to ask for this, but I'm going to give myself an out in even how I put the question, which is why he put that whole tag of give me a real picture, give me a real image, because if it's an image that he doesn't like, oh, that's not real. He built in, gave himself an out to deny whatever is presented. That is not an honest position to start from in any discussion.
Yeah, exactly right. It's like a double standard for flirts.
Yeah, and that goes into, you know, they're constantly, the flat earthers anyway are constantly asking, why can't they turn Hubble around and show us a picture of Earth? Well, because we have other satellites that are already doing that, you know, but those satellites aren't real. And I'm like, dude, seriously?
Yeah.
You know, so you're going to tell me satellites are fake, but you're going to ask for a Hubble telescope view while telling me that Himawari doesn't really exist. You can't have that both ways.
Well, and even then, Hubble, if they were to reorientate Hubble to get an image of the Earth, it would look like absolute crap because the optics on Hubble are not designed for that.
Correct. Yeah, it would never be able to take a picture of something that close. I mean, its resolution is designed for very, very distant objects. That's why you can't even use to take a picture of the Apollo landing sites on the moon, because its minimum resolution is not small enough for something that is that close.
Yeah, Hubble looking at the Earth is akin to me trying to read a book without my bifocals. You know, my eyes have aged enough and changed enough that I have to have more than one corrective lenses to be able to see far objects and be able to see really close objects. In fact, to this point, I actually use trifocals now. You know, so even though it's a very simple technology with my eyeglasses, it's very similar to how Hubble or other satellites are, and their optics are designed.
Yeah, and imagine not wearing your reading glasses and then holding that book up against your nose and trying to read it. So it's all kinds of levels of impossible. And besides, we already have satellites that are doing those kind of pictures. I mean, all the GOES satellites that the NOAA uses for weather tracking, Himawari 8 is a great example of that. We already do what people say we should be doing. And then he moves on. This guy also moves on now and straw mans with 9/11, so that's kind of interesting too.
Yeah, I love it how they
kinds.
basically make assumptions of what we say and are misrepresenting what we say. So basically, in effect, what you have here is someone who is complaining that things don't work the way we say they don't work. What?
Yeah. Well, the comparison that I like to give to people who are acting in that way is, you're holding an apple and complaining that it's not an orange.
Yeah.
Exactly right.
Now prove it's an apple.
No, and they're going. Their whole thing is they're holding an apple, complaining it's not an orange, and want you to prove that what they're holding is an orange.
That's right.
You just can't win with these guys.
Oh no.
They'll just twist anything you say around and throw it back in your face as a straw man or something else.
Yeah, and that's the thing with comment threads like this too. It's easy for someone like this troll to go ahead and dismiss what he doesn't want to address, because you really can't press him on it, because he just completely ignore it. And I'd love to see a person like him. I actually like to see this guy come out and try to actively debate somebody on what he's saying, where he has to actually support what he's saying. Trust me, I'm the authority won't work then.
Yeah, these types of comment threads, I don't get involved in too much, although I will from time to time. I start out usually thinking, okay, maybe I can at least show him where his fallacies are. But eventually I do lose patience with them, and some of it starts to become poking the bear just for fun. And then eventually I lose my impatience and my irritation and just start to see the comedy in it.
Mm.
And basically the rest of the thread is just back and forth between him and Anti-Flatter, asking for citations and trying to weasel out of it. So that's pretty much all I've got for that thread. How about you, Amy? Anything interesting in the chat?
Yes, please. I do. Professor Bell says, I was in Antarctica in 1975. Definitely had 24-hour sun. Some of my students are packing to go for the summer right now. They have a balloon with them. Balloons are unreliable and have a very short lifespan. And yeah, Dorian Gaming says, looking at Earth with Hubble is just like looking at a book close up with binoculars. And Raj Hawk says they've used the Earth as a flat field to check for mirror and sensor damage. It's seen as a motion blur, essentially. And then Professor Phil Bell comes back and says, you are exactly correct. We have all sorts of trouble getting the settings just right to be able to photograph the satellite being deployed.
Again,
All really good comments. Go ahead, Jared.
Oh, yeah, exactly that. Settings have to be just right. And a lot of these devices that are up there, the settings can't be changed very easily, if at all, once they're there, once they're in location. So yeah, and then another common argument that we end up getting is, well, where's the video footage looking back to Earth for the entire path and the entire travel of the rocket? And what they don't realize is that those video feeds, they're not there for the public. They're not there for us. They're there for the flight and engineering team to monitor and then also analyze after in case something goes wrong.
And the other part of that too is those teams, and all the analysts and engineers, they really don't give a crap about somebody who's denying what they're doing is real. That is not even a concern to them.
They're probably not even aware of a lot of it.
No, the only real concern to a conspiracy theorist is being able to continue their narrative. And something was said last night on a live stream that kind of made me kind of, they were talking about how they were having mixed feelings about highly educated experts entering the debunking arena. And on one hand, they appreciate the help from highly educated experts, but on the other hand, they're kind of, it kind of removes some of the stuff that your average debunker does. I disagree. I think it actually prolongs the argument, and I'm sure your gentleman on the panel has seen it, and I know Dr. Bell in the audience today has seen it on his channel, that the more educated a person is who is offering information in their area of expertise, the more a conspiracy theorist will push back against that, because that totally starts to destroy their narrative.
Yeah, I enjoy debunked. Well, that's not even so much debunked. It's actually explanations, like AB Science. Those, he's not speaking from a standard debunk situation. He is actually an authority on the information he's presenting, and I think that adds a whole huge dimension to how this works. And it was amazing to me how Sleeping Warrior keeps coming back at AB, telling him he doesn't know what he's doing for a living. It is absolutely amazing to me.
Yeah, because they absolutely have to, when faced with an expert, try to destroy that expert's credibility in order to continue their narrative. I didn't really attract much trolls on my personal channel because I kind of kept it like comedy, grade school science when I threw science in it. I was just kind of doing it for fun. But I got a little serious in a couple of my videos, and I did a couple of videos about the psychology of conspiracy theories. And when the conspiracy crowd started to realize that I am really educated in this area, and that is my field of expertise, they started pushing back really hard. When they found out that they couldn't really push back because I was correct, they started trying to co-opt a lot of those arguments and then do the whole projection thing and stealing a lot of that lingo in order to say that we are the ones that are doing XYZ when it comes to what's going on inside a person's brain. I found that very interesting.
Yeah, that would be that guy in his continual everybody's got Dunning-Kruger and cognitive dissonance. Yeah.
Whereas he suffers the worst of the lot.
So have you guys seen that now that people are becoming aware that you are experts in the fields of electrical and computer and structural engineering that you're getting more pushback from the conspiracy theorists because of your expertise?
In my interactions on panels and everything, it's been there from day one for me. But that's because the content that I put on my channel to this point has been more relaxation, kind of get away from a lot of the idiocy, just kind of point and laugh at it at times. But it's really more tailored to give an outlet that is not centered around those flapping heads, because while I do appreciate some of people like AB Science and others coming in, I would recommend them, again, going the route that AB Science does, where, okay, this topic has been broached, here's the information that was put out, that information is incorrect, here's how it actually is. Not so much to address the person themselves and trying to educate them, but more correcting the overall misinformation that other sources have been trying to put out there. And I think that's the best way to go about it, and just don't so much give those other voices the direct attention. Just, okay, this is being said, this is being propagated, here's the actual information, and by the way, check the description and you can get access to some, if not all, of the source material, and just correct it in that way, because that's ultimately what will address it the best, is by talk about the subject, ignore the person themselves, unless the person themselves makes it to where they are like the couple of the guys in the comment threads, where they assert that they're an authority, and if you can show, it's like, well, this person has tried to explain it in this way, here are some foundational errors, this shows a demonstrable lack of understanding of the actual topic, I would not trust them as an authority for those reasons. And again, you're not attacking the person, you're not doing an ad hominem, you are sticking with what is said, the information, and the topic itself. You stick with that, fucking rock on.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what we do on this channel, even though we're addressing specific conspiracy theorists who have made claims. Even here, we're just talking about what they're saying, not who they are so much, really, because that's irrelevant. I don't care that Bo Patah is a llama farmer. If he's self-educated enough to be able to intelligently discuss rocket science with a rocket scientist, more power to him.
Yeah, but one of the main premises.
Go ahead.
Go ahead, Mike.
Yeah, I haven't actually attracted any attention to any of my recent videos, so yeah, I haven't had to deal with any of that yet.
One of the main premises of this channel, when I first approached Logical about doing this collab, was the fact that, yeah, the point and laugh is fun, and yeah, a lot of these big debunkers out there do give good information to back up what they're saying. But I really felt there was a need for a forum where we could have this type of intellectual discussion and actually bring on the experts who are in the know on the topic and who can give us the real solid truth. And that can, in my opinion, should back up the debunkers, not fight against them.
Yeah, absolutely. And the point and laugh is all fun and good, but it doesn't really do anything for dispelling the urban legends and myths surrounding these conspiracy theories. In order to do that, yes, you must have an intellectual academic discussion. And we're coming up on 2 hours here. I really don't like to go over 2 hours on the show unless the audience is just really digging it. But once again, it seems like we have beaten the horse not only dead, but into a bloodied mass of jelly on the ground. So before we move into final thoughts, I want to check in with Amy and see if there's anything going on in the live chat that may or may not extend the program.
Oh, absolutely. Professor Phil Bell says, yes, you got that exactly right again. We have cameras for our use. We have to set resolution low to ensure we get the fastest signal back. Every second is vital. And Forever Learning says, I'm sure the balloon latex will become very brittle very fast in the super frigid air above the Antarctic, and it will disintegrate much earlier than on warmer continents. um, Professor Phil Bell says we generally get 2 to 3 hours out of a balloon at the most. We once had one last about 24 hours before it burst. We rescue our equipment with a parachute. And an intrigued feline asks, is the blueprint on the left supposed to be a representation of the Illuminati group? I think they're referring to Mike's avatar.
Yes, and thank you, Steaming Cup of Reason, for creating that for me.
Oh, you're welcome, sir. It was a great pleasure making that. That's actually, Jared will find this interesting. That blueprint I found on a blog somewhere of the internal layout of Deep Space Nine.
I thought it looked familiar.
Yeah, I thought you might.
And I tried so hard to find it, and I couldn't. Now I know.
There you go.
I didn't even catch that, and I'm not quite as big of a Trekkie nerd as what Jared is, but yeah, that totally escaped me. That's kind of cool.
Yeah, I thought it'd be a nice little addition.
Well, how about we move towards some final thoughts here about tonight or this morning's proceedings? Jared, why don't we start with you?
Oh, I guess in short, we can give everyone this piece of advice. If someone is claiming to be an authority, expert, or knowledgeable on a subject, that does not exclude them from fact-checking or verification of the information that they're putting out there. I think everyone on the panel would agree. Even something we say, if you're not entirely sure about it, you can either ask us for our citations or do your own actual research into the subject matter itself from the appropriate and reputable and verified sources. And if there was something we were wrong about, go ahead, bring that information back to us. We embrace new and more information and love being corrected on something we may have been wrong about. We're not afraid of it. Bring it on, guys.
Well said. What about you, Mike?
Yeah, it's a really good point Jared makes. We have no problems admitting that we're wrong. As a matter of fact, I love to learn and figure out things, especially if I got them wrong. I love to figure out why I got them wrong. And I noticed that the common thread with the trolls we did today is claims that are proof of the claims and not being able to provide any authority. So when you come up against someone making these claims, your best effort is spent trying to get them to show why it is they believe what that is that they believe, not just follow their trail of what it is that they want you to discuss with them. So just because you say you're an authority doesn't make you one.
Absolutely. And Jeff, final thoughts from you?
Basically the same thing as Jared and Mike said, yeah, we are the authority in our respective fields, but that doesn't always mean that we're absolutely right. We are always learning, just like everyone else. The difference is we're open to that learning. Most conspiracy theorists are not. So if you find yourself talking to a conspiracy theorist and they're trying to fill your head with all kinds of nonsense, don't take it for granted that they know all and are the be-all. Do your own research. Pick up a book. Go find out. Verify for yourself. There are many reputable sources out there that you can trust.
Absolutely. And before I give my final thoughts, I'll move over to Amy. What do you think about this morning's stuff, Amy?
Yeah, I have to second what Steaming Cup of Reason said. I mean, Jeff is right. Do your research. Don't take what people say. Take it with a grain of salt, because It may not be right. It may be right, but go research it first. And as far as conspiracy theorists go, the speaking in absolutes without any proof is, yeah, it should be a red flag. And thank you everyone for coming today.
Yeah, thanks, Amy. And Tanny Bogle, what do you got to say to everybody?
Oh man, I tell you, I think you hit the nail on the head when you said that we are actually on our side. We are able to turn around and say, "Oh, you know what? I got that wrong." That's something you'll never hear any conspiracist say at all, man. They are convinced 110% that they are right, no matter what, no matter how much evidence, how much proof, how much anything you put in front of them. They're that blinkered, they're that blind, they will not do it. And I think that's the big difference between the two sides, is that we will turn around and say, you know what, yep, we were wrong, and we learn from that.
Yeah, and that kind of leads into what I was going to say. Conspiracy theorists seem to think that being wrong equals a character flaw. It is not. It's just a lack of information and education. I was wrong on this stream when I said something about GPS satellites being in geosynchronous orbit. Mike corrected me. I didn't take that as an affront. I took that as an opportunity to learn outside of my field of expertise, and I am grateful for that. So my last thought basically for tonight is, if you don't know, go read, go study, learn, ask the experts. Run some of these experiments on yourself. Test for yourself whether or not you can trust what the expert's saying. Just don't make blanket statements because you just feel like you can't trust somebody, because it's more than just asking the question. It's actually going and doing. And with that, we'll say good night, good morning, good afternoon, wherever you happen to be, and we will see you next week at 11 a.m. GMT with a program where we will have Mike the engineer back again. We will have Professor Phil Bell back again, and we will be discussing the conspiracy claim that the moon landings were faked. Teddy, go ahead and take us out.
Good night, everyone.